the 9-round breathing meditation after a moment. Just first try to just collect your attention to your breathing. Then let's do the 9-round breathing meditation. Just remember breathing in the right nostril, holding it down at your navel, imagining the air coming up your left nostril, taking out all of the defiled airs and so forth, and repeat that process, breathing in the left, holding it at the navel, breathing out the right, in both nostrils, holding it at the navel, and imagine it going in the central channel. That's 3 rounds, and we do that 3 times. Try to imagine as you're breathing out all of the energy, the wind energy that's the mount of sickness or is controlled by any kind of outside influences, or is the mount of your attachment, anger, ignorance, so forth, depression. in a state of mind that's temporarily free of the usual course of thoughts, try to focus your attention on your mental consciousness. Bring your attention to your heart chakra, so to speak. Ignoring the input from the five senses, especially the eye consciousness. Try to sense the clear light nature of the mind. Even when the thoughts are coming, in an instant, recognizing their very presence as inferring the non-obstructive quality of the mind, its ability to perceive them also. Like a vast space. And whenever things temporarily arise within that space, let them go, be alert, let them go immediately, and again focus on that spaciousness. This experience of consciousness, this intimate, actual experience, can help us to decide, to come to the conclusion that the Buddha's explanation about consciousness has some special validity, that the mind is not material, the actual experience, conscious experience. It's not obstructing, it's not obstructed. Though it's impermanent, it's of a different nature than material. Within this mind, I can develop all the good qualities that I would like to have: contentment, long-lasting, deep peace of mind. I can eliminate all the faults from the mind because they're not embedded deeply within the nature of the mind. Think whatever length this life is that I have to live, I can use for the purpose of myself and others in a spiritual way, not just to get objects of the senses, to obtain pleasure, not simply to have temporary wealth and fame and the attention, ego gratification of others' attention. All of those things are fleeting. In future lives, would have to work again to achieve family and friends, wealth, security. In this time that I have left, I'm going to try to devote it as much as I can by being alert, conscious of my mind, devoted to spiritual development. Try to transform even my karmically powerful actions this lifetime, whatever has been developed up till now, whatever life I have, to try to transform that into the path by watching my mind, being alert, countering the afflictions when they arise so that I don't harm others, don't harm myself, and working to familiarize with virtuous states of mind, positive states of mind that I can start to appreciate, enhancing what compassion I have, what love, true love I have for others, renunciation, wisdom. Thinking that it's not enough simply to find my own liberation. If I open my heart widely to the plight of others, all other living beings are experiencing the same uncontrolled samsaric rebirth until they achieve arhatship. They've all been intimately related with me, just as our mothers, our fathers, our dear friends of this lifetime, all living beings have been just as close, numberless times, depthlessly kind. It's only the projection of our mind that prevents us from recognizing that equality. In order to really benefit others, I have to achieve as high a state as is possible, because there will always be some beings that I'm not able to help if I'm not fully developed. So for that purpose, to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all living beings, I'm going to participate in the class, the last of the series of classes on the stages of the path tonight. With a motivation to help others, the activity of listening to the Dharma can become very powerful. With at least something similar to bodhicitta, wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of others, motivated by that, engaging in the process of listening, contemplating, meditating, the karma that I accrue will be very powerful. So with that motivation, I'm going to participate tonight. And relax. Bring your attention back. Present. So we have some guests. Some of you met Venerable Ana Victoria before, right? Anila from Mexico. Mexico City. And I forgot your first name. Louise? No. Diana. Diana's visiting tonight, who's living out here in the Santa Cruz area. At tea break, you can kind of, what's the word? Schmooze. You can schmooze and meet the people during tea break. Is that the right word? Smooth? Schmooze? Schmooze means kissing? Kissing up. That's smooching, isn't it? Schmoozing means just hanging out, and isn't it? Maybe that's Yiddish or something. Okay, maybe it's different. Okay, whether we're smoozing or schmooching or whatever, you can do that at tea break. So, last time we had come almost to the point of where this particular unit's going to end on the section on recognizing a life of leisure and endowment. So we're only going to get up to there during this unit. And we were talking last time about around 220 in the commentary, Geshe Sopa's commentary, on how to practice between meditation sessions and restraining the sense faculties. We talked a bit about that. We were just had finished that, and we were talking about acting with introspective alertness, the foundations upon which you act, acting with introspective alertness with regard to the foundations, and following an appropriate diet. And we sort of just went over that very briefly, practicing diligently without sleeping at the wrong time, and acting properly at the time of sleep. So we're going to review that a little, and then we're going to finish today with this next subject about refuting misconceptions about practice. So in the Lam Rim Chenmo text, even though our syllabus is on the intermediate, middling Lam Rim, because we don't have a translation right at this time. What is this, August 2004? We're using this text as a basis. So we're around page, 103? 102? Restraining the sense faculties. So we talked a bit about that last time. If a person is doing retreat especially, it's very important to try to restrain your sense faculties. So that is to be alert that, in a certain level, even to restrain your mind from going to what the senses are observing. That's an extreme blocking, right? So, like Shantideva mentions in some of the verses of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, that might seem a bit extreme to us, but maybe we can understand there would be a period when it would be beneficial to practice that way. If a person were walking along the path, they should not look, just let their attention go everywhere, but occasionally, just look in front of them and walk, keep their mindfulness on their meditative object, and occasionally stop and look around and see where they are, and so forth. If you meet people, sometimes you notice when you meet the lamas, they act, very friendly. If you see them walking around, not when you go for an interview or something, but they act very convivial. They ask you how they are, how you are, and so forth. How you are, and then they'll bid you goodbye and they'll be on their way. So not to act, in some kind of catatonic state, like when people come by and just ignore them, but try to keep your attention on your meditative object. But the main sense here, I think, of guarding the senses is, as the text mentions, to guard yourself against what we might call inappropriate attention. Do you remember what that term means? Carrie, do you remember that? We've talked about this sometime. What would inappropriate attention be?
Sorry, I
No.
feel like I'm guessing, but
Oh, okay.
from my base of knowledge at this point, I would think it would be, like you said, not focusing on the object of your meditation or what you're thinking of in the moment. Maybe thinking about lunch or thinking about letting your mind drift to that.
Who has a feeling that they're not just guessing, but they might have some idea? Venerable, have you heard that expression before?
Yeah, I think it's when you're fixed on something, but with attachment or with anger.
It is a particular form of attention. You remember there's a mental factor called attention. This is called sulshin mayimba. So sulshin means properly, in a right matter. Mayimba means not. So inappropriate. Sulshin mayimba yiche. Yiche means attention. Yila chepa. So being attentive of something in the wrong way would mean focusing upon the samsaric qualities that appear and imagining that they're true. Oh, that's really nice. Wow, if I had that, I'd really be happy, You see another person that you might find attractive, and you sort of double take, and you sort of focus and you think about it, or you see a nice car, and you start thinking about the qualities of it. And that is a basis, one of the bases for developing the afflictions, this kind of inappropriate attention. Appropriate attention would mean if you noticed something was attractive to your senses, to recognize that from your Dharma experience that you're getting more and more familiar with, and to think, this only appears this way right now. If it were to remain for some period of time, it would change. It would no longer appear attractive. Maybe like, say, the flowers, looking young and supple and beautiful right now. Or another person, or yourself, or some particular situation in your life that you start feeling particularly attached to. Because all of these things are impermanent, and the more you attend to them inappropriately, you start to develop certain states of mind, attachment to them, repulsion for things that seemingly look unattractive right now, so forth. So that is kind of the more essential part of guarding the senses. Guarding your senses from, even though some objects may appear to them, and the sense consciousnesses may actually take part in perceiving them, to guard your mind from inappropriately attending to them. I think we talked about that before, no? So, will you remember that now? Yeah. With that mention. So proper attention would mean thinking about the various qualities, impermanence, that this is actually the nature of suffering, the things that you might inappropriately attend to and think, oh, that's really good, that's really fantastic, that's real pleasure. To think about them, attend to them with a Dharma understanding. Okay? That they are the nature of suffering while you're in cyclic existence. I think I've told you a story before. Once when I was with Lama Yeshe, before he passed away, many years ago, and I had a chance of, we spent some time working on the White Tara sadhana, and I had recorded some things on a tape recorder that I had bought. Did I tell you the story before? Yeah. It's a good story. Okay. And we were out on the veranda at Kopan, and Lama Sopa Rinpoche came out of his room, kind of rubbing his eyes, and looked at the tape recorder, and went into this long, extolling the virtues of the tape. Oh, this is fantastic. Oh, tape recorder, you could do so much with this. But Peter bought a camera, he said. There was another monk at the time, Peter Kedge. Maybe he wasn't a monk yet at that point. And then later he wasn't a monk again. And he went on about this, and he said, oh, but that's not useful. This is really useful. And Lama Yeshe looked up at him and with a very scolding and wrathful mien said, depends on what you do with it, Sopa. So if we attend to things, of course this was not scolding Lama Sopa. This was kind of Lama Sopa's great compassion, acting in a way that there can be a teaching for other people, in particular this one, thinking that something is inherently good, you know. It depends on what you do with it. Anything in your life, even being wealthy or rich or something, wealthy or attractive or popular or whatever, it if you use it for just worldly means, worldly goals, really doesn't have any special purpose. Okay. So Lama Tsongkhapa in the text also talks about here the appropriate diet. This is on page 105 in the Lam Rim Chenmo text. So not eating, I mentioned, I sort of ended with a little talk last time that when we talked about the middle way, sometimes people think the middle way, remember we were talking about this, sometimes they think it means just not eating too much and not eating too little, or not staying in the sun too long, or not staying in the sun too little, sort of just moderation. That's not the meaning of the middle way. It's a completely different mindset. But here, when we're talking about the various foundations that are necessary to be successful in meditation, it talks about appropriate diet as being one of them. So it says not eating too little. I noticed that sometimes I don't think anyone here that we know is particularly, what are the terms that are used now? Anorexic and bulimia, bulimic. But I've known people at some of the Dharma centers that whatever reason, whether it's because of low self-esteem or because of that and wanting to look attractive or whatever, almost starving themselves, if you really don't take care of your diet, the mind is very difficult to control. Sometimes you need to have a certain amount of material, sort of earth element within your body to control the mind. If there's too little, sometimes the errors act in a very unrestrained way. So oftentimes when people get lung, you've heard of lung, right? The Tibetan doctors say the best remedies for lung are oil, meaning like meat, amusement, like going to the movies, or letting your mind, not focusing on one thing completely, sex, alcohol. Those are the things they often mention. Have you heard that? Yeah. So for the Sangha, it leaves out, all that's left is essentially meat. No, those are things that help to control, that can help to control a particular kind of constriction of the errors, which has to do with not only diet, but too much squeezing of the mind in an inappropriate way, not a skillful way. So here Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about this in general, not eating too little. If you eat too little food, you'll be hungry and you'll become weak. It sounds like it's obvious, right? Leaving no strength for virtuous activities. Therefore, not eating too little means that you must eat just the right amount that will allow you not to be afflicted by hunger until tomorrow's meal. When I was in Nepal, when I first became a monk, I was helping Venerable Marcel, who was working in our company, and trying not to eat after midday, as is amongst the vows of the Sangha. And one of our teachers, one of the great tutors of the Dalai Lama, debating partner of the Dalai Lama, Serkon Senshab Rinpoche, mentioned that when you're trying to work for the benefit of sentient beings, if you're keeping pratimoksha vows and bodhisattva vows, sometimes although it may be tempting to restrain your diet in such a way that you're not, you're keeping the vows literally on the pratimoksha level, but it leaves you in a state of being weak and your mind weak and tired so that you can't really help others. So you have to find the right kind of balance there. Sometimes it's more advantageous than to eat after midday in that particular circumstance, with the bodhisattva vow being of a higher importance. Eating too little means that you must eat just the right amount that will allow you not to be afflicted by hunger until tomorrow's meal. Not eating too much, this is because if you eat too much, your body will be heavy. Do you know that? As if you were carrying a burden. It'll be hard to breathe in and out. There's Dorje with much effort. Sleepiness and lethargy will increase. You'll be unfit for any action, so you'll have no strength for eliminating the afflictions. So here, in a sense, moderation in eating, knowing that you're eating, when you eat the food, originally, as you're offering it to Buddha, which is one of the special yogas in the Mahayana, to accumulate merit, and sometimes commitment when you take refuge and have other kinds of vows, to actually offer the food to the Buddhas to accumulate merit, but also to think of it from that point of view as medicine so that you take an appropriate amount of it. Not to overeat, not to eat too little. Eating digestible and wholesome food. With such foods you eliminate old feelings of suffering related to food and you do not create new ones. Eating appropriate food which does not produce afflictions. What kind of foods would produce afflictions? What do you think?
I think it would depend largely on it. It's just another thing to be attached to. So I think for one person it might be chocolate, for somebody it might be something else. I think it's anything that would create.
So if you eat the food, here it says eating appropriate food which does not produce afflictions. But you're thinking about the food as a source of affliction. Here's the food producing afflictions. What does that mean?
Is your sexual energy if you're a monk?
Yeah, or no.
Or not?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, right? Right? Right, because can cause, well, indigestion is not really an affliction, is it? It might seem like that.
I think it is.
Veal or cows mistreated.
So eating animals that what?
That were mistreated. That suffered.
Oh. How
like,
would that?
like veal. In order for you to have a good veal, you have to put it in a small box, and
Right.
it's torture.
So, but how does that, say for instance, someone just gives you some food. There's some foods that are, by their nature, conducive to, if your mind is very subtle, conducive to the generation of the certain kinds of vibration in the body, certain kinds of attachment energy, like eggs often supposedly are conducive to generating attachment and so forth. Usually, Soquel Rinpoche used to say that if you were to eat meat, it's better not to eat. This is maybe different from what Louise is saying about the way that our meat is. What's the word? Grown, cultivated, manufactured, prepared. The actual animals that are raised to in very cruel and circumstances with the sole import of using them for food, whereas in Tibet that was not necessarily the case. There were some people that did raise animals for food, but oftentimes the animals that were eaten were animals that died accidentally, although there were rumors of people, sometimes nomads, pushing animals off of cliffs or something like that. But in general, there is a tradition like that. And Soquel Rinpoche used to say there are certain kinds of meat that would be conducive to generating anger. For instance, the larger animals, cows and so forth, whereas some of the animals like sheep, although this may be different today, like veal, you were talking about veal is what? Cow, baby cows, yeah. So sheep meat supposedly has a vibration that is more pacific. So I think that's one of the things that's being talked about here. It can also be perhaps that today also, I mean, it's not exactly in, it depends on which one of these you look at, but just the way that the animals are slaughtered as they know they're about to die, and certain hormones are, how to say, released in their body and so forth. This can affect your mind when you consume them. So in the Mahayana Sutras, it says in general, if someone is trying to develop bodhicitta, it's better at that point, great compassion bodhicitta, it's better not to eat meat at all. In the Vinaya teachings, it teaches that if meat is given, the monks and nuns who are begging can receive that as long as they didn't ask for it to be killed, they didn't see it being killed, and there was no doubt about that in their mind. In Tantra, there's even another level that sometimes there is some benefit to eating meat. So it's this subject about meat is very, very meaty, very complicated. Yes?
Comment in this section that I was curious about. On page 104, the element of direction, and at the very end there's a reference to the 5 places to avoid. Mm-hmm. And in the back it says,
No, 167.
167 lists the 5 places as a place that sells liquor, a brothel, a bad slaughterhouse, the king's palace, and a regular slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
What's
So those aren't good places. Yeah, no. Bad slaughterhouse, good slaughterhouse. I'm not sure. You have to, maybe in Geshe-la's commentary there's something there, but I haven't, usually I don't go to any slaughterhouses, so. In Nepal you do, in India you sometimes find animals being slaughtered on the street, and, or if you can actually go to a place where they're being slaughtered. So those are kinds of places that you want to try to avoid, because they can bring up very strong emotions and so forth. Yeah, sometimes the very unskillful slaughterers use a mallet or a club to beat the animal senseless. So there's incredible pain and so forth, and distress, and so I'm not sure if that's what's being referred to by a bad slaughterhouse or not. Let's go on. Let's see if we can finish this. So, moreover, the remedy for craving food lies within meditating on the faults of food. And there are 3 faults. The fault that arises from the causes of enjoyment. The fault that arises from the causes of enjoyment. So contemplate how any colorful or aromatic and good-tasting food whatsoever, once you've eaten it, appears as vomit. Once you've chewed and moistened it with your saliva. The fault that arises from digesting food, contemplate how food produces such elements as of the body as flesh and blood after it is digested in the middle or the last period of the night. Contemplate how some food becomes feces and urine and then remains in the lower part of the body, which you have to excrete each day. Think how many kinds of illness develop in connection with this food. And the third, this is the 3 faults, the 5 faults that come from looking for food, which is the 3rd fault. So the faults that involved looking for it. So what you can think of in this case is like when we do the fasting puja of Avalokiteshvara, the Nyungne, one of the things one recognizes is all the negative karma that one has created in searching for, thinking about, procuring, eating, enjoying, contemplating, meditating on food. All of the negative karma that you have created to be born in the lower realms, especially as a hungry ghost in relationship to food. So with that kind of motivation, helping to, during that kind of period when you're doing the fasting puja of Avalokiteshvara, we could call Nyungne, abiding in the you could say the fast, if you want. Recognizing out of compassion all of the sentient beings who are experiencing that kind of suffering as a result of food, which is one of the main causes of ordinary beings creating negative karma. Many times, even when you're in retreat, even before your lunch session, maybe the last half hour or 40 minutes of your meditation session is thinking about what you're going to be having for lunch, preparing it and so forth, savoring it beforehand. So take a look at that, and maybe as you're reading this, we can go back over after the break. But I want to finish this section and start the last section. How to practice diligently without sleeping at the wrong time, and how to act properly at the time of sleep. So this also has to be understood like food, not in the sense that if you're a real practitioner, you don't eat, or you become like Shakyamuni Buddha, like you know that there's a great virtue in not eating. You have to find the right amount. But also with sleep, if you're meditating, if you're actually in a meditative regimen, if you're in retreat, or if your life is becoming more meditative, you can start to recognize that you can get by with less sleep. Oftentimes, how many people here sleep more than 8 hours a night, feel you need more than 8 hours a night? More than 9? 9 or more? But about 9? About 8? About 7.5? 7? Okay. But yeah, 7. Okay. 6.5? Okay. 6? 5? Oh, okay. The ordained one. Georgie, how many hours of sleep do you get tonight?
6 or 7, I think, is optimal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have to recognize that sometimes when if you try to emulate the great beings like Lama Zopa Rinpoche for many years taken the aspect of not sleeping at night, that kind of behavior very much depends on your ability to bring the airs in the central channel and to really have a very calm state of mind, so that even your meditative state becomes something that's conducive to regeneration of the body. My own experience has been that the more crazy the mind is during the day, the more mental anguish there is, if you can call it that, the more tired I am at night. Even if I do a lot of physical work, I might feel physically tired and want to go to bed, but I don't need as much sleep generally. Of course, if you're physically exhausted and mentally exhausted, then you're going to seemingly need more sleep. In the tradition of the Buddha, when he was giving advice to the monks and nuns and the very sincere practitioners at the time of the Buddha, he said that one should try to of the various periods of the night, not to sleep at the very beginning period of the night, but to stay up and to walk, sometimes to walk to keep yourself awake, to recite the sutras, which is something that you can do perhaps that doesn't require as much attention as actually reading and studying, although you might be able to study at that time. And then to sleep in the very middle portion of the evening, in the night, for some hours, maybe even in the time of the Buddha, even if one is in a very meditative state, maybe even less than 3, 4, 5 hours. And then after that, to get up early and to begin to do spiritual practice so that one doesn't spend a lot of time in sleep. But you have to be very realistic. At our stage of practice, we can't necessarily practice in that way, force ourselves to have a very few hours of sleep, because we will again end up, we'll be driving, or Carrie will be driving over on the highway and fall asleep on his bicycle and fly off the bridge or whatever like that. So you have to be realistic and experiment. At Sera, when I was living at Sera Monastery, usually the monks, many of the monks, not the younger boys, but when they got older, they would, in the evening, they would walk in the courtyard of their housing unit or down the roads, and they would have a book sometimes. When they'd get by a light, they could read. If they didn't have something memorized, they would be reciting the various texts that they were studying. Even to that extent, even if your mind is not completely clear and to be able to study, that you might be able to do at other times when you're fully awake. And they would get up early when the mind is fresh in the morning and meditate and so forth. So, yeah.
When they talk about the middle portion of the night, is that based on your own sleep cycle, such as His Holiness gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Is it different for him than for someone who gets up at 8? Are they talking about, I've read this a lot, and I've never seen an actual reference to what it is.
Well, I think it's not necessarily between, sunset and sunrise, although it can, because then the middle of the night would mean, in the winter it would be like about midnight, right? Here, the middle of the night might be between 2 or 1 and 4, 1 and 3. I think His Holiness has said, there was an interview with His Holiness on by a guy that was doing a documentary for CNN one time, and His Holiness, the fellow said he wanted to come and photograph His Holiness getting up, and said, "What time do you get up?" And His Holiness said, I think he said 3:30. Pardon? 3:30. Always as he travels around the world, even with his incredible schedule. And so that would be kind of like, so if you took 3 hours before that, maybe 12:30 to 3:30, it's kind of like the middle of the night. In one sense, the first portion of the night is when the food that if you were to eat in the evening, the food is still being digested. And so I think it also depends on your own physiology and so forth. But I think it's kind of partially has to do with the actual the rising and setting of the sun and your own physiology. But somewhere around that period of the night. It said that also there's different kinds of, if you were to sleep during all those periods of the night, there would be different kinds of experiences. The dreams are not reliable in in various periods of the night. The dreams in the very last period before you awake are more indicative of the future, things that will be occurring in the future. Dreams at the very beginning are indicative of things that have happened in the past. And dreams that take place in the middle depend upon your digestion. They say, what you had for meal, which kind of means the present conditions. So that might also manifest dreams in the middle part of the evening. In the middle part of the night might also be a manifestation of whatever's preoccupying you at this point in your life. So let's see what some of the things that it says here. So there's a quotation from the letter to a friend, or his quotes here, the friendly letter by Nagarjuna. O reasonable one, after cultivating virtue all day, and in the first and last periods of the night as well, so that means the first period of the night is before this period when you're going to sleep, the last period is getting up early. So after cultivating virtue all day and in the first and last periods of the night as well, sleep between these periods with mindfulness. not wasting even the time of sleep. So all day and the first and last periods of night both refer to what should be done during and between meditative sessions. Therefore, while sitting or standing, act purposefully, as I have explained before, by completely clearing your mind of the 5 obscurations. There are teachings both for meditation sessions and for between meditation sessions with regard to restraining the sensory faculties and acting vigilantly, as we've talked about, as well as this section on making effort and practice instead of sleeping. Therefore, here I have singled out those teachings for between sessions. Your conduct during sleep takes place between sessions, so do not treat even that as having no purpose. So also when you're, especially if you're trying to make some progress, if you just let your mind go completely in between meditative sessions, and which includes, as Lama Khapa says, the time of sleep, if you just let your mind go completely unrestrained, you're not going to make as much progress as you could otherwise. You might not make much progress at all. So even when you go to sleep, to try to sleep and transform that activity of sleep into virtue. How can you do that? Remember? Do you know, Mark? How is it said that you can transform sleep into virtue? Eat some precious pills before you go to sleep, or?
I think if you hold a virtuous object in your mind as you're going to sleep, or a virtuous thought, that will.
Yeah. Diana, remember? When we talked about mind and mental factors, one of the mental factors is called sleep, remember? And it's a changeable mental factor. So it can become virtuous or non-virtuous or even neutral. Venerable, how can you advise us? How does one create sleep to become virtue?
Well, I think as Frank said, you can generate bodhicitta, for example.
Well, he said what do you say? Focus on a virtuous object beforehand, virtuous thought.
Or think about reality and absorb into the clear light if you do kanti practice.
That's what comes.
Like that.
Yeah, maybe something like that, if you can keep that state during the evening. But I think one of the things is that the motivation, say for instance, if you're not able to keep, if you don't have concentration to be able to remain in, to transform the sleep into a concentrated state, the motivation beforehand as you go to sleep to think, may I be able to make this sleep virtuous, and to contemplate on some Dharma subject beforehand, such as the value of the human rebirth, or renunciation, or bodhicitta, to try to sleep in a virtuous state of mind, with a very strong virtuous state of mind, and that can continue through the evening by the inertia of that can transform the process of sleep into a virtuous state. My dad, who was born in 1916, when he was 13, his dad died, and it was 1929, and he had to go out and work. Didn't get a chance to get an education, but he said he was always able to get up early in the morning just by the force of making a strong determination before he went to sleep. He said, I'm going to get up at 4:30, or I'm going to get up at 5. Do you ever notice that? Can you do that? Have you done that? So you try. If you have, like for instance, you have a plane, or you want to get up for meditation. Sometimes you can wake up 1 minute before the alarm clock is about to go off, by the force of that. So in the same sense, with that very strong determination, you can kind of mold the sort of sleep process with a very strong virtuous motivation. So I don't know if it'd be enough just to observe a virtuous object, but to try to transform the mind into virtue. Is there a difference? Like, what's a virtuous object? I don't know. What's a virtuous object? What? An image of a Buddha is a virtuous object? Maybe a Buddha, from the side of the object, something can become virtuous. Yeah, maybe something like that from just the side of the object. But just that's something exceptional. Generally, we have to generate our mind into a state of virtue. So that takes some effort. So and familiarity. So if you're not familiar in actual meditation, it's hard to transform your mind into a virtuous state. Like when we try to meditate, we motivate at the beginning of a session. In our little meditations, we're trying to practice to learn how to develop a motivation. Not later, when you say the words of prayers like, I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened, due to the merits of the practices of the perfection of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Just saying those words may not transform your mind into virtue, but if you've familiarized your mind with those meditations and actually, by the process of effort, created those virtuous thoughts, then saying those words can help you to recall those states, right? Follow what I'm saying? Bring back those states of mind. Just like when we meditate on emptiness, once you've observed emptiness and you've got some familiarity with it, you can generate a remembering consciousness of that without having to do the analysis in great detail until it becomes fuzzy, and then you want to reanalyze. Yeah.
For example, make mundane things like washing yourself more virtuous by thinking, may all beings wash away their stains as easily as I wash the dirt from my body, for example. Could you do something similar with regards to sleep? Like before sleeping, say, may all beings become refreshed and have their, stains melt away, by virtue of their sleep?
Yeah, when we train, we try to train the mind even in every activity that we do. If you're walking up the stairs, you're walking down the stairs, there are different ways to think that can transform, at that moment, transform what might otherwise be a neutral activity, or maybe even a negative activity, transform it into virtue through training in the mind like that. So even when you're washing the dishes or washing the floor, to think like this: may I wash away the stains from my own mind and the minds of all sentient beings as easy as this. And you can actually, that action then of washing the dishes can become then virtuous, whereas otherwise it might just be neutral itself. Or if your mind is just wandering, thinking about letting your delusions run rampant, it actually can become negative. So in the same sense, in going to sleep, if you can try to generate, you can practice in that way, I think. Also, let's take a little break and refresh your mind. Yes. Okay, so we're going to continue now with just end this last lesson. So we're going to go now to the next chapter, Refuting Misconceptions about Meditation. So this is a section coming before the human life of leisure and opportunity, perfect human rebirth. So when those of you who've studied Lam Rim before, usually you think of the Lam Rim, maybe the first meditation being guru devotion and then perfect human rebirth and so forth. So these other sections you may have had some instruction about before, but may not have studied in detail. So it's nice to have some introduction to this now. So one of the things that's talked about here, there are different things, but one of the things that's talked about is the idea that you often hear people today have the idea that meditation is just single-pointed concentration, or meditation means having no thoughts at all, right? Have you heard that, Venerable? In India, a lot of times people come, they think that meditation... Yeah, no, but I mean, people that, you're in India usually, so that's why at Tushita, as I meant, when they come to India and they're expecting to study meditation, and you present analytical meditation, and they might be surprised, and whoa, That's not meditation, you know. Zazen, maybe Zen meditation is just no mind, looking at the wall, having no thoughts, or just watching the breathing, or something like this. So Lama Tsongkhapa mentions that that is a common kind of misconception, that any kind of thought would not constitute meditation, right? From a Buddhist perspective, meditation means to familiarize the mind with a wholesome object. And in order to familiarize the mind at first, you have to use your conceptual mind. You have to use your thoughts. And we were talking about before, when Frank was saying, talking about the utility of even reciting words, as in the teachings on training the mind, to remind yourself of very, you know, like this, may I clean the minds of all sentient beings, or like this, may I be willing to go to the lower realms as you walk down the stairs for the sake of others. May I be willing to accept the defeat. And actually, even in words, and eventually in thought, to join all of those actions with some kind of conceptual activity, that can become meditation. But here, when you sit in an actual meditative session, in order to really generate virtuous states of mind, you have to, as we've said many times, you have to first hear the Dharma, know what is right and what is wrong. That's one stage. And there's a certain wisdom that arises from that, right? The wisdom that arises from hearing. Or you could say study. Then there's or reading. Then there's a deeper kind of wisdom that arises from contemplation, which is what we often would call meditation. What we call analytical meditation, say, for instance, analyzing the advantages of relying on a spiritual friend, on a teacher. Seeing the disadvantage of not doing so, seeing the great advantages karmically of future lives, actually having the karma to meet actual Buddhas by seeing your present teachers with pure view and so forth. So analyzing in this way, overcoming the doubts in the mind that are usually not attended to. You know, or we have no ammunition, perhaps, intellectual or wisdom ammunition to overcome our doubts and our preconceptions. So contemplation can mean like that. It can also mean, once you've gotten rid of the gross misconceptions, understanding the subject in more detail, like looking at it from all different directions, analyzing it so that your understanding of it becomes more clear and certain. It's at that point that you try to hold that understanding one-pointedly. We've talked about this before, right? Say, for instance, there's a difference between a meditation on impermanence and the meditation on love. They both would begin with a certain kind of analysis. In the meditation on impermanence, you might first analyze gross impermanence in regard to your own mortality, that you are definitely going to die, the time of death is uncertain, and so forth, to try to bring up that gross understanding of impermanence. And then to investigate the impermanence of all things that arise because of causes and conditions. Take practical things like relationships, your relationship to others, your good fortune or bad fortune, different things like this. Your intelligence at present will not always be there. So this, once you have a clear understanding of this, say for instance the inevitability of death, then you take that understanding, sort of that feeling, that understanding, you hold it single-pointedly. So you're, in a sense, you're alternating between analytical meditation, where you're thinking about something, you know, in a meditative environment. You alternate between that, and in the same meditative session, once you've come to a conclusion and a clear understanding, holding that understanding single-pointedly, as though it's, in this case, in the case of impermanence, it's almost as though it's an external object to the mind. You're not meditating on the impermanence of the mind, but impermanence in general. Whereas there are other kind of meditations when you try to generate your mind into a particular state, like, say, compassion. compassion, to meditate on compassion doesn't mean to think about compassion as something out there like impermanence. You're thinking about this, right? I see by your eyes. I've noticed sometimes it must be something in common in the TV. There's certain kind of things that come up. Some like on these what do they call it? The crime shows. You know, there's something now where they say, "Oh, I've seen it on 2 or 3 different things." That, oh, if the person, while they're telling the testimony, if they look to the left, it means they're lying. Is that right? You're referring? Neuro-linguistic program. And you agree with that, man? Is that true? Yeah. So I wasn't. It was. Eric wasn't looking left or right. He was looking up, sort of like he was thinking, "How does that work?" You know. So there's a difference between meditating. There's so linguist, was it neuro-linguistic programming? Eric was thinking. I could tell it that way. So there's a difference between meditating on something like emptiness or impermanence. Yeah, do it again. Yeah. Or karma. Or generating the mind into a particular state, like the 4 immeasurables, and compassion, love, equanimity. What's the 4th one? Rejoicefulness, joy, limitless joy. So, in the case of love and compassion, you begin by analyzing, and you try to generate within your continuum the mental state of compassion that looks upon other beings and wishes that they be free of suffering. And at first that may be easy for some people. If you take yourself, for instance, that's quite easy. You know, I wish I were free of suffering. And your loved ones, unless you're angry at them at that time, because we have spats with our family and loved ones, right? Sometimes. But someone that you love, your mom, your dad, your dog. Maybe people love their dogs. Sometimes they have less anger at their dogs and cats than their spouses. I'm not sure. So you might take them as objects and see if you can generate the mind that wishes that they be free of suffering, and expand that to strangers and to all living beings, including your enemies. When through analysis and through the actual teaching, sometimes the mind is resistant to generating that thought. You know, my enemies. You know, everyone should be happy except George Bush. You know, maybe we in Central California here, San Francisco, we would have that thought. If you were watching this tape and you live in, where is it, Missouri, or where's Kansas? You might think that's a strange thought. You might think everyone should be happy except John Kerry. Depends on your mental state. But if you can overcome those particular kinds of preconceptions that might eliminate certain beings, the Iranians or the Iraqis or the Israelis or the Palestinians or whatever, animals, all beings, spirits, even those who are harming you, and wish them to be free of suffering, when the mind is generated in that state, you hold that state of mind single-pointedly. That would be an example of alternating analytical meditation with stabilizing meditation, single-pointed meditation. When your understanding of that begins to fade, something that you're holding, whether it be impermanence or emptiness on one hand, or something that you've transformed the mind into, like love or compassion, when that begins to fade, then you might have to revert back to analysis again to get a clear understanding, a taste of that, and hold that conclusion of your meditation single-pointedly. So let's see in particular what some of the points that Lama Tsongkhapa was mentioning at this point. There are persons who have not begun to recognize that the classic scriptures and their commentaries constitute personal instructions, and who, therefore, might have the following qualm. You know what a qualm is? Yeah, issue, yeah. How come you didn't come? Yeah. You know what a qualm is? Yeah, okay. Qualm. When you meditate on the path, this is a doubt, or what did you call it? You had a good word. Okay. When you meditate on the path, you should. This is a thought that someone might have, a doubt. When you meditate on the path, you should only do stabilizing meditation rather than repeatedly analyzing your object of meditation. For repeated analysis with discerning wisdom is only for times of study and reflection, in terms of hearing and contemplating and so forth. Moreover, repeated analysis will prevent you from future attainments of Buddhahood because conceptual thought apprehends signs of true existence. So this was a kind of misconception very prevalent at the time of Lama Tsongkhapa, and probably, although maybe it may not be phrased that way, right, Venerable? Today, it may not be phrased that way, but some variant of that still exists today. That maybe analysis is good at certain point when you're studying or trying to understand, but when you meditate, you just single-pointedly keep the mind on one object. So the answer, the reply is, this is the nonsensical chatter of someone who is utterly ignorant of the crucial points of practice. Lama Tsongkhapa sometimes, in these scriptures, they sometimes came out with this, especially Kedrub J in some of the texts of one of Lama Tsongkhapa's disciples. It's like, just read some of the things he says about other people. It's just quite shocking. But this is to try to make your mind understand something, that this is completely nonsense of, the chatter of someone who's utterly ignorant of the crucial points of practice. Because Maitreya's ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, states, proper attention is based on prior study. Sublime wisdom, which takes reality as its object, arises from your cultivation of proper attention. So here Maitreya teaches that you should use the wisdom that comes from reflection to attend properly to the meaning of what you have studied. From this there will arise the wisdom that comes from meditation and perceives reality. So the wisdom arisen from meditation is something which already is stable, is something which is a concentrated, stabilizing meditation. But that has to arise in the same meditative session from analysis, in the same meditation session. So you're alternating analysis, and when you come to a conclusion of your analysis, you let go of the conceptualizing mind that keeps the mind active and still, moving. You just let go of that and focus on that which you have come to the conclusion of. Therefore, first study with someone what you intend to practice, a study from someone, and come to know it secondhand. Next, use scripture and reasoning to properly reflect on the meaning of what you've studied, coming to know it firsthand. So, like in our class, you're hearing some things. Some of you have heard many of these things before. Some of you are listening to some of the ideas in a certain sense for the first time this life. And then you have to go back and think about that, read the text in more detail, think about it, come up with doubts, try to rectify them yourself, rectify them by talking to your other Dharma friends, or then come back and ask questions. Then you start to get some first-hand knowledge of that. Once you determine the meaning of what you originally intended to practice with this kind of study and reflection, and you have no doubts, then familiarize yourself with it repeatedly. We call this repeated familiarization meditation. Thus, you need both repeated analytical meditation and non-analytical, or in other words, stabilizing meditation. You need both, because meditation involves both non-analytical stabilization on the meaning of what you originally intended to practice that was determined through study and reflection, and the use of discerning wisdom to analyze this meaning. Therefore, to claim that all meditations are stabilizing meditations is like taking one grain of barley and saying, this is all the barley grains there are. In other words, just taking one kind of meditation and saying this is all the kind of meditation there is. So that we have to be careful of those kinds of ideas, because sometimes we may run across statements even in Buddhist teachings. In the Theravada tradition, there's a certain school of thought that talks about the Mahavipassana Sutra, I think it's called. And in there's some statement that this is the one path, as though this is the only thing that you have to study, and the only thing that you have to practice. It's almost a little bit reminiscent of the famous statement that Christ made. Who knows what I'm talking about? I am the way and the light. How's it go? And other than by me, there's no way to the Father. Something like that, right? So sometimes people Christians may quote that and say, well, see, there's anything else is baloney. This is the only way. From a Buddhist perspective, we take that in the same way that we would take statements that the Buddha made about any particular practice as being the way or essential, the only thing. It means without that, you can't achieve the goal. Without Vipassana, you definitely can't achieve deep realization and transformation of the mind. Vipassana means penetrative insight, right? What in Tibetan we call laktong. So I think maybe what Christ said, from my point of view, Christ was manifesting as a great bodhisattva, almost taking the aspect of like a universal teacher, but not quite, because he didn't teach something that didn't take the aspect of turning the wheel of teachings of some kind of Dharma teachings for the first time. He was kind of continuing on from what already existed, kind of like a great bodhisattva. In a sense, other than by that kind of activity, emulating Christ, great compassion and willing to take the defeat and so forth, from a Buddhist perspective also, there's no way to achieve omniscience, to achieve the kind of Godhead that the state of omniscience that one might associate with the Father in Christianity. Yeah.
The phrase here that tripped me up when I was reading this was the non-analytical stabilization on the meaning of what you originally intended.
That would trip me up too. That's a long sentence. What did that say?
It seems to imply, my understanding, and perhaps it's incorrect in the Tibetan tradition, but where I came out of, non-analytical stabilization would mean to me basically just to quote that famous phrase, be here now. It doesn't seem to be with anything particularly in mind. And what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is how it seems like those are contradictory in nature. Non-analytical stabilization. How can you non-analytically stabilize on a meaning of something, such as compassion or bodhicitta?
How can you? What it means is, without the use of, at this point, analyzing, oh, that person should be loved because they, even though they're not someone who appears as a friend now, they have helped me in the past, they are worthy of my love. It is wrong for me not to offer my love to them in the same way it's wrong not, that if I were to discriminate between two poor people, one of whom I liked and one of whom I didn't, they're both worthy, being poor and hungry, they're both worthy of my giving. So using analysis like that first to come to the point of love, then when you have that state of love, no longer needing analysis, so being giving up analysis, so non-analytical, stabilizing, just holding that state.
Resting in or experiencing compassion?
If you want to use other words, you could say that, resting in. That's not wrong, but maybe not necessary. Say, for instance, when we talk about single-pointed concentration, when you're concentrating on one thing single-pointedly, if you think of it something external, not with the eyes and the ears, that's not called single-pointed concentration, but with the mental consciousness, fully qualified single-pointed concentration. Or in order to get to that point, say for instance you're trying to concentrate on an image of the Buddha. In order to arrive at that concentration on an image of the Buddha, you have to first analyze. The Buddha's hand is like, his left hand is like this, his right hand is like this, he's wearing these robes, and you have to scan, in a sense, in your mind's eye. If you got very familiar with that, and you could call that image to mind because you've already familiarized in the past then you could remain on that image single-pointedly. If it starts to fade at the beginning, if you're trying to visualize something or imagine something or generate the mind in a particular state that you're not yet familiar with or you have doubts with, how can you generate, at first, how could we generate love? Because we don't even have that state, a pure state of love even for one person right now. It's mixed very much with our expectations. When we say, like we said before, when we say I love you, often it means like, I love chocolate chip cookies. I love you means you please me. That's not the meaning of love in this context. Love is a state of mind that views other beings, senses them in a certain affectionate way, and on the basis of that wants them to be endowed with happiness. That's what's meant by love here. Not that, it's not talking about I like you or, I enjoy you, you please me. But love means wanting them to be endowed with happiness. Compassion means wanting them to be free of suffering. So to generate those states, the same way as to visualize the Buddha, you first have to engage in a certain kind of mental activity, which in this case is called analysis or analytical meditation. So in the case of visualizing, you might not think of it as analysis, but that also constitutes analysis. Visualizing from the bottom of the Buddha to the top, from the top to the bottom, or forwards and backwards, the body is transparent, and adding all of these features until an image arises to the mind. Once that image arises to the mind, if you continue to analyze, at that point, that can prevent you from actually profiting from the stabilization. Once you've got a clear image, to some degree, at first, even if it's only gross, hold that single-pointedly. Then in subsequent meditation sessions, when you analyze again, you can add more detail, just like drawing a picture. Okay? So this is one of the kinds of misconceptions that's being refuted or, taken to task at this point. Moreover, just as in page 110, moreover, just as study must precede the wisdom that comes from study, you have to study first. In this case, study is this word tupa in Tibetan, which means to listen or to read. And reflection must precede the wisdom that comes from reflection. Almost study I'm not sure study is a good word for this. Usually we say hearing, which includes reading. There's a certain wisdom that arises from that level of understanding. When you hear something, you read it without yet having analyzed it. Then when you contemplate it later, think, does that make sense? Does that explain other things? Is there some inner contradiction? That constitutes reflection or contemplation. That has to precede a wisdom that arises from reflection. You can't have the wisdom arisen from reflection until you've actually spent some time in reflection. So too, meditation must precede the wisdom that comes from meditation. So meditation here means having come to some clear understanding through analysis, holding that single-pointedly. And there's a certain understanding, a deeper understanding than that arises from that. More so than just understanding it through contemplation. As this is so, meditation means becoming familiar with what you have ascertained, what you've become certain of, using the wisdom that comes from reflection. So first there has to be the wisdom of reflection or contemplation. That's kind of an analysis. And once you've come to some certainty because of that analysis, I'm definitely going to die, or the Buddha looks like this, or whatever, then you hold that single-pointedly. Therefore, it is said that the wisdom that comes from meditation is a product of the wisdom that comes from reflection or contemplation. Okay? That's pretty easy, right? Understand? Thus, the depth of the wisdom that comes from your studies is commensurate with your studies. So, if someone were to, if your wisdom of contemplation depends on your wisdom of hearing or your wisdom of study, is here it's calling study, the more that you have an arsenal, if you want, or a treasury of study. Like oftentimes the Dalai Lama and other lamas, when they write the colophons of their texts, they say, I'm the Buddhist monk so-and-so who has heard many teachings. Not claiming that they had contemplated them or that they understood the meaning and meditated on them, but at least saying on that level they had heard the teaching. So there's a certain wisdom that arises from hearing, or in this case is translating the word hearing, that we usually translate hearing as study. The depth of wisdom that comes from your studies is commensurate with your studies. The breadth of your reflection is commensurate with this wisdom, while the depth of the wisdom that comes from your reflections is proportionate to your reflections. So the breadth of your reflection, what you can contemplate on, depends on what you've studied. If you haven't studied very much, you can't contemplate very much, isn't it? It's a common sense, right? It's like what we would say today, da. Is that the right pronunciation? Or is it more duh? Da. 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 Thank you. The reflection of your practice of meditation corresponds to the depth of your wisdom of reflection. So how much, in what depth you've reflected, while your ability to stop faults and achieve good qualities is commensurate with your practice of meditation. Therefore, the scriptures and their commentaries say that study and reflection are very important for the practice of meditation. So we've mentioned this many times before. There's in the Gelugpa tradition, perhaps in other traditions also, they have a expression, trying to meditate without study or reflection is like an armless mountain climber, someone trying to climb the mountain without arms. Many stories at the monasteries trying to encourage the monks and nuns to actually engage in study. Of course, studying alone, if you don't contemplate and you don't meditate, you could just become it just can become kind of a profession, kind of like Western academia. Oftentimes, it could be also at the monasteries in the East also. Oftentimes people might become what we might call mere scholars. They've heard a lot, and they might develop a certain kind of understanding of that and ability to write papers and become experts in some field, but it may not mold their behavior. Here it says, the magnitude of your practice of meditation corresponds to the depth of your wisdom reflection, while your ability to stop faults and achieve good qualities is commensurate with your practice of meditation. So unless you meditate on the meanings that you've thought about, the spiritual meanings, I don't mean just like economics or something like this, the spiritual teachings, unless you actually meditate on them, you won't necessarily be able to overcome your faults, develop good qualities. It's like having the medicine but not taking it. You've got, the perfect, when you're angry, you should do this. And when you're attached, you should do this, but you never take that medicine. Make sense? The example I've mentioned many times, example of Pat, Ryan, and I joining the army, or maybe we're drafted, and instead of going through basic training and learning how to use the tanks and the weapons and everything, the gas or whatever America has at its disposal, we're reading comic books and going to the cinema and having Spanish food, what are they called? Tacos or something. And when the war actually comes, when the enemy is coming, there we've got the instruction book at that point, We don't know how to, we haven't actually done it yet. We haven't shot the weapons. So you need to, and of course the enemy, at that point it's too late. If you try to apply the antidotes without, at the time the enemy is coming, not having applied the antidotes before, not actually generating the antidotes in meditation, you're not going to be able to do it in everyday life. So whatever happens to you in life, if you have problems, if good things happen, if bad things happen, try to use them as material for your meditation. So here's an objection. Again, this is like the negative state of mind. What is determined through study and reflection is not intended for meditation, but is merely for promoting superficial knowledge and eliminating others' misconceptions. Therefore, when you meditate, you must meditate on something unrelated to your study and reflection. I'm not sure. That must be some school of thought, but we're already sort of imbued with this particular kind of way of thinking, so that sounds quite absurd. Does that make sense, the sentence? So it's sort of like saying, oh, Abhidharma, the scriptures. Certain meditators might say, that's only for scholars, you Gelugpas and Sakyas, because there's a saying in the Tibetan tradition, the Gelug and Sakya traditions mainly uphold the scriptural understanding of the Buddha. And the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions mainly uphold the meditative practice. Because, in the Nyingma and Sakya, although you have a lot of teachings also, there's not the same kind of emphasis on scholasticism as there is in the Sakya and Gelug. And there's not as much emphasis, say, at the monastic institutes on, originally, right from the beginning, on practice, like you find in the Sakya, and the Kagyu and Nyingma. But the great meditators of all the traditions have both study, contemplation, and meditation. It's just a certain flavor. You could become very dry and an object of scorn, sort of like this is kind of that kind of scorn, saying, if you just study Abhidharma and all of these scriptures, that's only to uphold the teachings and to eliminate other people's misconceptions. But when you meditate, you don't need that. You meditate on something else. That's a complete misconception, both from anyone's point of view. All of the Buddhist traditions is kind of an extreme view. So the response is, this is incoherent, like showing a horse one race course and then racing it on another. Does that make any sense to you? What would we say? What would be an analogy we would use? Like learning how to play the violin, spending a lot of time training yourself to play the violin, and then going into concert and being handed the trumpet. It's training the horse on one field, but then when the actual race comes, on that field he knows where to speed up, where to turn, everything, where the holes are and so forth, where the pitfalls are. But then when you actually race, you race on another one. This completely destroys the process of developing the three wisdoms. What are the three wisdoms? Mark?
Hearing, contemplation, and meditation.
Right. Here it's called, hearing in this text, the way they're translating it study. What we usually talk about contemplation, they're calling reflection, but they call meditation. So actually in Tibetan it says, let's say, Tupa le jungwe sherab. So the wisdom arisen from hearing. So it's not just the wisdom of hearing, as though, I don't know what that would mean. That would be the very short way of saying it. So wisdom arisen from hearing. So there is, even when you hear something and you make some coherent sense out of the words, you say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I understand that. A certain understanding arises, a certain wisdom, very superficial. If you contemplate that, even at that time that you're hearing it, a deeper kind of understanding accrues, wisdom of contemplation. And then, of course, if you contemplate that later, reflect upon that later, greater understanding, wisdom arises. Then there's a deeper kind of wisdom that we don't talk about so much in the West. Once you've come to that deep understanding of spiritual truths, holding it single-pointedly, without analysis, that third kind of wisdom arises, the wisdom arisen from meditation. This completely destroys the process of developing the three wisdoms in succession, which is what the scriptures as a whole present. This also implies the nonsensical statement, much study is not needed to travel the true path. He says this is Lama Tsong Khapa says this is nonsensical. You do need study to travel the true path. But again, study alone is not enough. So don't be satisfied. Don't think that as we're studying, somehow that study alone sets you apart as someone special. You have to be able to use that, what you studied, to put into contemplation, put into meditation, so that it actually affects your behavior, getting rid of your faults and developing your good qualities. Quote, much study is not... One indication of a failure to recognize these critical points is in not distinguishing in the beginning between those who are well trained in the sutras or tantras and those who have no training at all, and then not assigning the appropriate amount of practice. I'm not sure what exactly it's saying. Another such indication is that meditators are criticized if they study or do research. These mistaken customs persist in Tibet. So even at the monasteries, not exactly this point, but say it was at a certain point, maybe in the previous generation and probably many generations before that, many of the monks did not know how to write because it was considered to be an obstacle to understanding. Nowadays in the Gelugpa monasteries, there are examinations. You have to know how to write. Was at earlier times, have you run across this, Venerable? Earlier times, maybe the generation of the Geshes before this present generation of Geshes, only those who were Rinpoches or such were thought to have the leisure to learn how to write. Otherwise, it could become a cause of diversion, like writing poetry or writing letters and so forth. There's certain, you could kind of see a certain kind of sense to it, but that's an extreme kind of view. While mere familiarization with knowledge acquired through the wisdom of study and reflection is indeed not a good quality that results from meditation, how could this contradict familiarization as simply being equivalent to meditation? I'll have to look at that sentence again. If it did, then meditation would never be possible for an ordinary being who had not attained access to the first meditative stabilization. What's he saying there? Can anyone decipher that? While mere familiarization with knowledge acquired through the wisdom of study and reflection, okay, mere familiarization. So there's a certain wisdom acquired, knowledge acquired through the wisdom of study and reflection, that indeed is not the quality or knowledge that results from meditation, that alone. How could this contradict familiarization as simply being equivalent to meditation? I'm not quite sure if that's translated correctly. Let's go on. For the texts on knowledge often explain that the process of entering a higher level from the level of the desire realm creates a good quality that results from meditation. But there is no such result of meditation, creation of a good quality, associated with the desire realm itself. The text on knowledge here is talking about the Abhidharma, I think, often explain that the process of entering a higher level from the level of the desire realm. What does that mean? That means when we have a desire realm mind right now, in order to elevate that state of mind to a state of mind of the first concentration, sometimes called the first dhyana, or in Pali they call jhana, the first trance or the first concentration of the form realm. For the texts on Abhidharma often explain that the process of entering a higher level from the level of the desire realm, in so doing you create a good quality that results from meditation. Because in order to separate from the desire realm, this is maybe an esoteric point, In order to separate from a desire realm mind, you have to, what's said, to separate from the attachment to the desire realm. In order to do so, you have to generate what's called mundane vipassana. You know what vipassana means? Higher insight, right? You have to have an incredibly concentrated mind on the basis of samadhi already, having generated tranquil abiding. You have to be able to look upon the defects of the desire realm and compare them with the qualities of the first concentration. And in so doing, you can extricate your mind from attachment to the desire realm and focus on the qualities of the first concentration. But there is no such result of meditation associated with the desire realm itself. What does the note 178 say? Does it have it in succession? Oh, 178 says, the term translated here is good quality that results from meditation, gomjong. Oh, she's just that which has arisen from meditation, has a specific meaning. Such good qualities are only associated with the form and formless realms. However, if you attain them in the desire realm, there are just no good qualities that result from meditation which are associated with the desire realm itself. I'm going to have to think about that too, if I were to try to explain it, so I'm not sure what that's saying. Therefore, understand meditation as it is explained in Dharmamitra's clear words. Meditating is making the mind take on the state of or condition of the object of meditation. Okay? This is another way of saying, one way Maitreya says meditation is familiarizing the mind with a wholesome state. Here he says meditating is making the mind take on the state or condition of the object of meditation. So transforming the mind into that particular state or object. For example, meditating on compassion and meditating on faith mean that the mind must be made to develop these qualities. Because of this, even the great translators sometimes use the term path of meditation, and at other times use the term conditioning, as in the phrase from Maitreya's Ornament of Clear Knowledge, Clear Realization. Quote, the paths of seeing and conditioning, or what we say, path of meditation. Conditioning and meditation are synonymous. So here, this is just talking about this quotation from Dharmamitra's clear words. In other words, meditation means familiarizing with something, conditioning your mind with it, transforming your mind into it. Let's go on to the next page. On 112, it says, question, if, as you say, there are two types of meditation, analytical meditation and non-analytical, stabilizing meditation, what kinds of practice involve analytical meditation and what kinds involve stabilizing meditation? So Lama Tsongkhapa says, I will explain this. Analytical meditation is necessary for meditations such as those on faith in the teacher, the great importance and difficulty in obtaining leisure and opportunity. What does that mean? How to get on welfare? What does that mean? The great difficulty in obtaining leisure and opportunity? It means perfect human rebirth, that what we have a life of leisure and opportunity. The meditations, the teachings on death and impermanence, karma and its effect, the faults of cyclic existence, and the mind of enlightenment. He says the spirit of enlightenment. This is because these meditations need an awareness that is long-lasting, very forceful, and capable of changing the mind. Without this, you will not be able to stop the forces that oppose these meditations, such as disrespect to the teacher, grasping to permanence, grasping to the qualities of samsara as pleasure and so forth. Those minds are so imbued in our mind that you just can't simply bring to mind the opposite and be successful in meditating on them. You have to first analyze to overcome these discordant features. Furthermore, the development of such a powerful awareness solely depends on repeated meditation with discerning analysis. For example, when you mistakenly superimpose many attractive characteristics upon the object of your attachment, you produce intense attachment. This is kind of like inappropriate attention, right? Superimposing, by thinking about it, thinking, oh, that's pretty. That's really pretty. Ah, that is great. Dorji knows this one. You produce intense attachment. Similarly, when you think often about the unattractive characteristics of your enemy, you produce intense hatred. So you begin to meditate, as it said earlier. It's kind of like almost a process of meditating, familiarizing with these false projections of the mind, the way our mind usually works. It is the same in the case of any meditation on any of these types of practice, such as death and impermanence, karma and its effects, and so forth, the shortcomings of cyclic existence. Regardless of whether the image of the meditative object is clear, therefore practice analytical meditation because your mind requires a long-lasting and very forceful way to apprehend its objects. Forceful and long-lasting. So not only, I think maybe not only this lifetime, but also future lifetimes. If you familiarize very forcefully with these antidotes, then in future lifetimes, you will have you'll have the tendency to be able to overcome those misconceptions more easily, right? You won't be sort of so fascinated and opinionated that things are in contrary to the Dharma. When you achieve stabilizing meditations, such as meditative serenity, what does that mean? Tranquil abiding. Here, I think you can see there's different authors who wrote different chapters, and the terminology is a little different from chapter to chapter here. When you achieve stabilizing meditation, such as meditative serenity, that means shine or shamatha, you create a serviceability. What is that? Pliancy, physical and mental pliancy, or shinjang we say, that allows you to place your mind on one object of meditation according to your wish. If those whose minds cannot stay on one object of meditation analyze repeatedly while they are trying to achieve a stabilizing meditation, they will be unable to produce mental stability. Hence, in this case, they should practice stabilizing meditation. I will explain this later in the section on meditative serenity and insight, in the sections on Shini and Lakton. So what he's saying is this. If you're trying to develop single-pointed concentration, if at that point, say for instance, you're trying to visualize yourself as a deity, or visualizing Buddha in front, or you're trying to develop single-pointed concentration on emptiness or on the clear light nature of the mind, of course you first have to analyze in order to get a mental image to hold on to. But if you're not satisfied with the clarity of that, you keep on analyzing, that becomes an obstacle to actually attaining tranquil abiding. Lama Tsongkhapa mentions later in the middling Lam Rim, in his similar text to this, the shorter text, in the section on tranquil abiding and Shine, that's one of the crucial points. Whatever degree of clarity, after some amount of analysis, don't continue to analyze endlessly at first. Whatever degree of clarity you get of your understanding, hold that single-pointedly. That will help you to develop stability, stabilizing meditation. And that imprint in your mind, then when you go back to analysis, allows you to go into more detail. It's just like you're drawing the outline of a picture, and you've drawn a certain amount, then you hold that. Then, because of holding that, later you're able to generate that general image very quickly, and you can begin to add the details. If you try to add, before having stabilized the general outline of something, the general understanding, if you try to add all the details right from the beginning, there's some people who might be able to do that, but unless you've familiarized yourself with the entire corpus of that meditation in previous lifetimes, you're not going to be able to ever get any stability, because you can always, as soon as you start getting the details, the nose, you get there, then the whole body disappears. Then you go back to try to get the body, and then the nose disappears. You're never satisfied, so you never stabilize on anything. I think we're almost out of time, no? What do we have? Yeah.
On top of page 12.
Page 12.
112, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Therefore, meditate continuously on any distribution, protection, purification, or enhancement of your body, resources, or merit. This indicates that meditation includes any performance of 4 practices of distributing, protecting, purifying, enhancing with regard to your body, resources, or merit. What's that mean?
So this is from Shantideva's text called Compendium of Trainings, this Shiksha Samuchaya, that His Holiness taught in Bodh Gaya a couple of years ago. A very famous, the text that after Shantideva wrote the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, actually recited it in the assembly and then disappeared while he was reciting the chapter on wisdom. And then a lot of people were uncertain about what he had said. They tried to remember what he said. They couldn't, so they looked for him. They finally found him in a distant place, and they asked him what were the sources of his discourse. And he said he'd also composed this book called the Compendium of Trainings, Shiksha Samuchaya. And in that he had a lot of the sutra sources for the practices, exchanging self and others, and wisdom, and so forth. So in there's a lot of emphasis about the Bodhisattva having to take care of the Bodhisattva's body and resources, not for their own, as we do in our own life, for our own benefit, but from the point of view of preserving this vessel-like body to be able to continue to practice, to be able to benefit others, to preserve one's resources so that one can share them with others, and to enhance those resources so that you can benefit others in greater degree. Like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, accumulating vast quantities of merit, using that as a basis then to accumulate the resources to build a huge statue that can benefit sentient beings and so forth. A little bit like that. So maybe that's enough. But this, you can read, finish reading this chapter. This kind of finishes this little section on the first part of the Lam Rim. And in the succeeding weeks, when some of you who are here for Trident Rinpoche's teachings, we'll try to continue. Maybe we'll have some preliminary lectures before Rinpoche comes on the next meditation on what's often called perfect human rebirth, the life of a rebirth of leisure and endowment, and the subsidiary meditation, so that the meditation on death and impermanence, and the suffering of the lower realms. And then Rinpoche will, when Trident Rinpoche comes, he'll probably begin on refuge, which comes after that. So maybe we can review for those people that were here last year and also for this class to go over those points and then continue with Rinpoche over refuge. Also, when Kirti Senchab Rinpoche is teaching Uttara Tantra, I asked Rinpoche yesterday, what's today, Monday? Yeah, yesterday I think we were taking a walk around the hill, and I said that our class has studied, mind and mental factors and tenets, and I don't know, I think I mentioned penance, and the Heart Sutra. And although Rinpoche was very cautious last year not to talk much about emptiness, maybe people would be, there's some people who have a little more knowledge this year, and Rinpoche sort of chuckled. And then later he said, well, this section of Uttara Tantra is mainly about refuge. So also there you'll get another approach to refuge, some of the great quotations about the definition of Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, and so forth. So let's end here with a little dedication. Try to relax your body and mind. think of the merit that we have accumulated even this evening, even with effort, even if things were not clear, with a positive motivation. Think of the merit that we've accumulated from this study during this year. All the other merit that we've created that has not yet ripened in our continuum. Particularly the merit that we've created through this study, contemplation, and so forth. And rejoice about that. How wonderful that is that we have accumulated what Lama Tsongkhapa considers to be this essential ingredient to changing our minds. Without study, without contemplation, there's no way that we can actually familiarize and change our behavior. We've created a vast store of merit that will have pleasurable consequences within cyclic existence. But unless we dedicate those merits, the consequences will have a certain end, a finality. When they ripen, when the karma ripens, it will be experienced, perhaps even becoming the cause of our attachment at that time, or pride when good qualities arise or resources arise. So let's dedicate that merit so that it becomes inexhaustible until we achieve enlightenment. Due to these merits that we've accumulated in the past, in the present, and that we will accumulate in the future, that will definitely bring pleasurable results within cyclic existence. In whatever way they ripen, may they become the cause of my progress along the path, developing compassion, bodhicitta, wisdom of emptiness, renunciation. May I, as I experience the results of this, always be impelled to use whatever good fortune I have for the benefit of others, for my spiritual development, and achieve very quickly full awakening of enlightenment, from which I can spontaneously, perfectly act to lead all sentient beings out of suffering, themselves lead them into everlasting blissful happiness. All as a result of these merits. Especially whatever merits we've created, may it become the cause of the long life of the Dharma, which is the sole medicine of sentient beings. May all the holy beings who teach paths to liberation and enlightenment have long lives as a result of these merits. May their Dharma wishes be effortlessly fulfilled. May the Dharma spread where it has not spread before, and everlastingly abide where it has spread and be enhanced. And try to seal that dedication, this dedication, in an understanding of emptiness of the three spheres. The merits themselves are empty of true existence. The objects, the goals dedicated to are empty of true existence, that they still appear and function, have conventional existence. The act of dedication itself can't be found other than as an imputation upon its parts, also empty of true existence. So without grasping at these, having made a conventional dedication, try to seal that so that it can't be destroyed by anger and wrong view and the abandoning of the Dharma.